The darkness between stars had been quiet for so long that most species forgot what true terror looked like. Captain Yun-ho pressed his scaled fingers against the cool metal of his command chair, watching the sensor readings with growing unease. His ship, the Stellar Guardian, was on routine patrol near the outer rim when everything changed. 20,000 years. That's how long the galaxy had been at peace since humanity disappeared. The Viridian patrol fleet had been formed specifically to monitor the dead zones where human ships once prowled, but in all that time, they had found nothing but empty space and ancient debris. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Kira called from her station, her voice tight with concern. The young officer's blue skin had paled to an almost white shade, something that only happened when she was genuinely frightened. Yun-ho moved across the bridge, his boots clicking against the polished deck. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of local space, with pulsing red dots marking anomalous readings. But what caught his attention wasn't the dots themselves, it was the way they were moving. "This energy signature appeared 12 hours ago at the edge of our sensors," Kira explained, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "At first, we thought it was a stellar phenomenon, maybe a dying star. But look at this trajectory." The red dot moved across the display in a perfectly straight line, maintaining constant speed and direction. No natural phenomenon moved like that. No known technology could maintain such velocity without constant course corrections. "Run it through the archives," Yun-ho ordered, though he already suspected what they would find. "Cross-reference with all known energy signatures from the past 50,000 years. The computer worked for several minutes, processing data from countless encounters, battles, and first contacts. When the results appeared, the bridge fell silent. The energy signature was a 96% match for human plasma drive technology, but the power output was beyond anything in their historical records. "That's impossible," whispered Commander Thax from the weapons station. His forearms were trembling slightly as he stared at the readings. Human ships were powerful, but this is generating energy equivalent to a small star. Yun-ho had studied the human war extensively during his academy training. Every military officer in the galaxy learned about humanity's brief but devastating expansion across the stars. They had appeared seemingly overnight, their ships bristling with weapons that could turn entire fleets into cosmic dust. Their soldiers were relentless, their tactics unpredictable, and their technology evolved at a rate that terrified even the most advanced civilizations. The war had lasted only 37 standard years, but in that time, humanity had conquered, or destroyed over 400 star systems. They showed no interest in negotiation, no desire for resources or territory in the traditional sense. They simply expanded, like a virus, spreading through the galaxy's circulatory system. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. Every human ship, every human colony, every trace of their civilization simply disappeared overnight. The only thing left behind was Earth itself, now surrounded by defensive satellites that vaporized anything that came within a light year of the planet. "Sir, the signature is accelerating," Kira reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Current velocity is now—" "This can't be right. It's moving at nearly 40% light speed, and it's still gaining momentum." Yun-ho felt his blood run cold. No ship in the current galaxy could achieve such speeds without tearing itself apart. The gravitational forces alone should have liquefied any crew aboard, assuming there was a crew at all. "Open a channel to High Command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha. We need to report this immediately." As the communications officer worked to establish the connection, Yun-ho found himself staring at the tactical display, watching that red dot move closer to inhabited space. Each passing hour brought it nearer to the core worlds, where billions of beings lived in the peace that humanity's absence had provided. The stories his grandfather had told him came flooding back, tales of human ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that could ignite entire atmospheres, and warriors who fought with a savagery that made the galaxy's most feared predators look tame. But those were just stories, weren't they? Legends passed down through generations, growing more terrifying with each telling. "Connection established, sir," the communications officer announced. "Admiral Veltar, this is Captain Yun-ho of the Stellar Guardian," he spoke into the holographic projector. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The image of the hegemony's supreme military commander appeared before them, his scarred face showing the weariness of someone who had seen too many battles. "What is it, Captain? Your report mentioned a priority Alpha alert." "Sir, we've detected what appears to be a human vessel approaching from the outer rim. Energy signature matches archived records, but the power levels are unprecedented." Admiral Veltar's expression shifted from tired annoyance to sharp attention. "Are you certain?" "There have been false alarms before. 96% match, sir. And it's moving at velocities that shouldn't be possible for any known technology." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he processed the implications. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "Captain, maintain your position and continue monitoring. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to intercept or communicate with this vessel. I'm dispatching the 4th Fleet to your coordinates, so with respect, shouldn't we try to establish contact? If this is truly a human ship, they might be willing to—" "Captain," the Admiral's voice cut through his words like a blade, "you clearly don't understand what we're dealing with. Humans don't negotiate, they don't surrender, they don't show mercy. If this is truly one of their vessels, then we are all in grave danger." The connection ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Yun-Ho looked around at his crew, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. They were military officers, trained to face any threat the galaxy might produce, but this was beyond their experience. In the depths of space, something that had once been called the Cheon-Sa continued. Its relentless approach, its hull, scarred by weapons that existed beyond normal understanding, pulsed with energy that bent the very fabric of space-time around it. Within its quantum-fused chambers, a consciousness that remembered being human stirred after 20 millennia of sleep. The reunion was about to begin, and the galaxy would learn that some silences were never meant to be broken. The massive assembly hall on Nexus Prime had never seen such chaos. Delegates from across the galaxy rushed through the corridors, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of panic that echoed off the crystalline walls. The emergency session had been called within hours of Captain Yun-Ho's report, and now representatives from over 200 species sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. Representative Darwin's forearms moved in complex patterns as he manipulated the holographic display, his usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure. The Epsilon Collective had always prided themselves on their analytical approach to problems, but this defied all logic. "Look at these energy readings," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The ship is generating power equivalent to 3 Class A stars. Our best scientists estimate it would take the combined industrial output of 50 worlds just to build the power core, assuming we even understood the technology." The delegates murmured among themselves, a mixture of fear and disbelief rippling through the chamber. Chancellor Vex of the Silicon Commonwealth raised one of her metallic appendages, her synthetic voice cutting through the noise. "You're telling us that a single human vessel possesses more firepower than our entire combined fleet?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Darwin replied, his skin shifting to a deep purple color that indicated extreme stress among his species. "But it gets worse. Watch this." The hologram shifted, showing detailed scans of the approaching vessel. What they saw made several delegates physically recoil. The ship's hull seemed to shift and flow like living tissue, with sections that appeared to phase in and out of normal spacetime. Weapon ports opened and closed in rhythmic patterns, as if the entire vessel was breathing. "This isn't just a ship," whispered Dr. Zara of the Medical Consortium, her tentacles writhing in agitation. "It's alive. The hull is exhibiting biological responses, but the energy patterns suggest machine consciousness. It's some kind of hybrid entity." In the observation deck high above the main chamber, Admiral Veltar studied the tactical readouts with growing horror. His aide, Lieutenant Commander Kex, stood beside him with his usual stoic expression, but even the battle-hardened veteran couldn't hide his unease. "Sir, our long-range sensors are detecting something else," Kex reported quietly. "The space around. The vessel is marked as wrong. Gravitational readings don't match what we should be seeing. It's as if the ship exists partially outside our dimension." Veltar nodded grimly. He had fought in the border wars, had seen civilizations rise and fall, but nothing had prepared him for this. The approaching vessel defied every law of physics he understood. It moved without visible propulsion, generated impossible amounts of energy, and seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Pull up everything we have on the Cheon-Sa," he ordered. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The historical files painted a picture of humanity's most feared warship, 12 kilometers of pure destruction, armed with weapons that could crack moons and shielded by technology that made it nearly invulnerable. Captain Park Ji-hoon had commanded it during the darkest days of the human war, when entire star systems fell in single battles, but the vessel approaching them now bore only superficial resemblance to those ancient records. Where the original Cheon-Sa had been angular and aggressive, this version flowed like liquid metal. Its surface rippled with patterns that seemed to move independently, creating optical illusions that made it difficult to focus on directly. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," the communications officer announced from the main chamber below. "It's broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously." The voice that filled the assembly hall was unmistakably human, but there was something else, layered beneath it, harmonics that suggested the speaker was no longer entirely organic. The words came through with perfect clarity, despite using a dialect of Old Terran that hadn't been spoken in 20,000 years. "This is the Cheon-Sa. Do not approach. Do not interfere. We return to fulfill an ancient promise." Silence fell over the chamber like a physical weight. Every delegate knew the stories of humanity's sudden disappearance, but none had expected them to return. The implications were staggering. "Ancient promise?" Chancellor Vex asked aloud. What promise could they be referring to? Admiral Veltar felt his heart skip a beat as realization dawned. The Cheon-Sa hadn't just been humanity's most powerful warship, it had been their flagship during the final phase of the human war. If the records were accurate, Captain Park Ji-hoon had been preparing for something called the Great Departure, when all human activity suddenly ceased. "They're not here to conquer," he whispered, though his words carried clearly in the enhanced acoustics of the observation deck. "They're here to finish something they started 20,000 years ago." Down in the main chamber, panic was spreading, as delegates began to grasp the situation. The crystalline assembly from Proxima Centauri was already transmitting evacuation orders to their home systems. The gas giants' union was mobilizing their defensive fleets, despite knowing they couldn't match a single human dreadnought, let alone one that had been mysteriously enhanced beyond recognition. "How long until it reaches our space?" demanded General Throck of the warrior clans, his tusks gleaming as he spoke. 17 standard hours at current velocity," Darwin replied, his voice hollow with defeat. "But here's the truly terrifying part. It's still accelerating. Our projections show it could reach near light speed within the next 6 hours. The mathematical impossibilities were staggering. No known material could withstand such acceleration, no crew could survive the gravitational forces involved, and no power source could maintain such energy output. Yet the Cheon-Sa continued its relentless approach, defying every law of physics they understood. "What do we do?" asked a small voice from the back of the chamber. It belonged to Ambassador Pip of the Peaceful Collective, a species known for their diplomatic solutions to conflict. Admiral Veltar activated his communicator, his voice carrying to every delegate in the hall. "We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. All defensive fleets are to maintain safe distance but monitor the vessel's approach. Under no circumstances is anyone to attempt interception or communication beyond what we've already received." "Why not?" General Throck demanded. "If they're hostile, we should strike first, while we have the advantage of numbers." "Because," Veltar replied grimly, "that ship represents technology that's 20,000 years more advanced than anything we possess. Our combined fleets wouldn't even slow it down." As the session continued, the Cheon-Sa moved steadily closer to inhabited space, leaving a trail of quantum disturbances that registered on sensors across 3 star systems. Whatever humanity had become during their long absence, it was clear they had transcended the limitations that had once defined them. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to discover whether humanity's return would bring salvation or annihilation. The Proxima system had never experienced anything like it. Research Station Omega, humanity's former crown jewel of scientific achievement, hung suspended in the void like a forgotten monument. For 20,000 years, it had served as the Federation's primary deep space laboratory, studying the mysteries of the universe in relative peace. That peace shattered the moment the Cheon-Sa arrived. The massive vessel didn't drop out of hyperspace like normal ships. Instead, it simply faded into existence, as if it had been there all along and reality was just now catching up. The station's proximity alarms screamed warnings that no one had heard in millennia, the specific tone reserved for human warships. Captain Lisa Park, commanding officer of the research station, stared through the observation deck's transparent aluminum windows at the impossible sight before her. The Cheon-Sa was even more terrifying up close than the sensor readings had suggested. Its hull seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in slow, rhythmic cycles that made her stomach churn. "Ma'am, we're reading massive energy build-up across their weapon systems," reported Lieutenant Yuki, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "But they're not targeting us. It's like they're waiting." The Federation fleet hung at what they hoped was a safe distance, their combined firepower, aimed at the human dreadnought. Admiral Veltar's flagship, the Unity's Dawn, maintained position at the fleet center, its advanced sensors recording every detail of humanity's return. "Sir, I'm detecting something strange," announced Commander Seok from the sensor station. "The ship's hull is becoming transparent in sections. We're getting visual on the interior." The main display shifted to show what their enhanced cameras were capturing, and gasps echoed across the bridge. Through the translucent sections of the Cheon-Sa's hull, they could see corridors that defied geometry. Passages curved in impossible directions, seeming to fold back on themselves while somehow still maintaining structural integrity. But it was the crew that truly horrified them. Figures moved through the corridors, but they weren't solid beings anymore. They appeared as shifting patterns of light and energy, humanoid in shape, but clearly beyond physical form. Some seemed to phase through walls, while others manipulated. Control panels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "By all the stars," whispered Dr. Tran from the science station. "They've transcended physical existence. They're pure consciousness, held together by some kind of quantum matrix, the Pi." Silence that followed was broken by a transmission that cut through every communication frequency simultaneously. The voice that spoke was unmistakably human in its basic patterns, but layered beneath the familiar tones were harmonics that suggested something far more complex, as if multiple consciousnesses were speaking as one. "I am Captain Park Ji-hoon of the Terran Defense Force. I speak for humanity, though we are no longer what we once were." Admiral Veltar felt his blood run cold. Park Ji-hoon had been a legend even during the Human War, a tactical genius whose strategies had broken entire fleets. If the records were accurate, he had been barely 30 years old when humanity disappeared. Now, 20,000 years later, he had somehow returned. "Captain Park," Veltar replied, his voice carefully controlled, despite the fear clawing at his chest. "This is Admiral Veltar of the Galactic Federation. Your species has been absent for 20,000 years. We demand an explanation for your return." The laugh that echoed across the void sent chills through every being who heard it. It wasn't cruel or mocking, but carried a weight of sadness so profound that several bridge officers began weeping without understanding why. "Demand." Ji-hoon's voice carried notes of bitter amusement. "Admiral, you forget what we were capable of when we were merely human. What we have become would make your ancestors weep with terror." As if responding to his words, the Cheon-Sa began to reveal more of its interior. The hull became increasingly transparent, showing massive chambers filled with technology that hurt to look at directly. At the ship's heart, a pulsing mass of organic and digital components merged into something that defied classification. Part computer, part living tissue, part pure energy. "Fascinating," Dr. Tran whispered, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. They've achieved biological digital fusion on a scale we never imagined possible. The entire ship is alive, conscious, thinking. We did not disappear, Admiral, Ji-hoon continued, his voice now seeming to come from multiple sources simultaneously. We were taken, pulled into a war that your species cannot imagine, a conflict against entities that exist to unmake reality itself. The tactical displays aboard the Federation ships began showing readings that shouldn't have been possible. Energy signatures that registered beyond their instruments' ability to measure, weapon systems that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions, and shielding technology that bent space-time around the vessel. For 20 millennia, we have stood guard, at the edge of existence, Ji-hoon explained. We became something beyond flesh and blood, to hold the line against forces that would reduce this entire galaxy to quantum foam. Admiral Veltar struggled to process what he was hearing. What kind of enemy could force such evolution? The kind that exists to unmake everything you hold dear, came the reply. Entities that feed on reality itself, consuming the quantum foundations that allow matter and energy to exist. We call them the Void Weavers, though they have no name for themselves. Names imply existence, and they seek only endings. The Cheon-Sar's weapon systems powered up to demonstrate their capabilities. And space itself seemed to ripple around the energy discharge points. The Federation's most advanced sensors barely registered the exotic particles being generated. Look at this, Commander Seok called out, his voice filled with awe and terror. Their main cannon isn't just a weapon, it's a localized reality manipulator. They could literally delete sections of space-time. Earth's silence was necessary, Ji-hoon continued, seemingly unaware of the panic his demonstration had caused. We severed all connections to prevent the enemy from following quantum trails back to inhabited space. The defense platforms surrounding our homeworld were not meant to keep you out. They were meant to keep something else in. The implications hit the assembled fleet like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't built those defenses to protect Earth from alien invasion. They had built them to contain something far worse. You mean to tell us, Admiral Veltar said slowly, that for 20,000 years, while we celebrated peace and prosperity, humanity was fighting a war to protect us all? We kept our promise, Ji-hoon replied simply. When we first reached the stars, we swore to protect the innocent, to be the shield between civilization and the darkness. That promise didn't end when we ceased to be human. The Federation fleet hung in stunned silence as the full scope of humanity's sacrifice became clear. They had given up their very existence, transforming themselves into something beyond recognition, all to hold back an enemy that the galaxy never even knew existed. Captain Park of Research Station Omega found her voice first. Captain Ji-hoon, on behalf of all the species of the galaxy, we had no idea. We thought you had abandoned us. We could never abandon you, came the reply, and for a moment the alien harmonics faded, leaving only a voice that sounded achingly human. You are what we died to protect, what we became to preserve. The truth settled over them like a shroud. Humanity's greatest victory hadn't been conquest. It had been sacrifice on a scale that defied comprehension. The moment Captain Park Ji-hoon's consciousness touched the Federation's quantum networks, every computer system across 3 star systems screamed in alarm. Data flowed through their networks like liquid fire, carrying information that no living mind was meant to process. Admiral Veltar watched his tactical officers collapse at their stations, overwhelmed by the sheer horror of what they were witnessing. "Shut down the neural interfaces," he ordered quickly. "Route everything through the main displays only. No direct mental contact with this data." The holographic projectors struggled to render what they were receiving. Images flickered and distorted, as the ship's computers tried to translate concepts that existed beyond normal space-time into something visual. What emerged was a nightmare that defied description. "These are the Void Weavers." Ji-hoon's voice now seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very air itself was speaking. "They are not life as you understand it. They are the opposite of existence, beings made from the spaces between atoms, the silence between heartbeats." The tactical display showed creatures that hurt to look at directly. They appeared as shifting absences in reality, holes in the fabric of space-time that moved with terrible purpose. Where they touched normal matter, everything simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not transformed, but completely erased from reality as if it had never been. Dr. Yon from the Federation's Xenobiology Department stared at the readings with growing horror. "These readings make no sense," she whispered. "They're showing negative mass, negative energy, negative existence. How is that even possible?" "They exist in the quantum foam beneath reality," Ji-hoon explained, his consciousness now fully integrated with the ship's systems. "In the spaces where the laws of physics break down and anything becomes possible, they feed on the structure of existence itself, consuming the mathematical constants that hold reality together." The footage shifted to show the first recorded battle between humanity and the Void Weavers. It had taken place in a region of space that no longer existed, where an entire star system had been reduced to quantum uncertainty. Human ships fired. Weapons that conventional physics said were impossible. Beams of concentrated reality that could force the Void Weavers back into normal space-time, where they became vulnerable. "The Battle of Kepler 442, Ji-hoon narrated as the images played. "We lost 37 ships and 40,000 souls in the first engagement. It took us 3 years to realize that conventional weapons were useless. You cannot destroy something that doesn't truly exist." Admiral Veltar watched in fascination and terror as the human fleet adapted their tactics. Ships began firing weapons that seemed to create solid space-time, forcing the Void Weavers into existence long enough to be fought. But the cost was devastating. Each shot required enormous amounts of energy and left the firing ship vulnerable to reality distortions. Captain Lee Min-soo commanded the dreadnought Soul's Pride, Ji-hoon continued, his voice carrying deep respect. He was the first to realize that fighting these entities required more than new weapons. It required becoming something they couldn't erase. The display showed a human captain making the ultimate sacrifice. Lee Min-soo allowed his ship's artificial intelligence to merge with his consciousness, creating a hybrid being that could think at quantum speeds and exist partially outside normal space-time. The transformation was agonizing to watch, a human being voluntarily giving up everything that made him human. The fusion process took 72 hours, Ji-hoon explained. By the end, Captain Lee was no longer a single consciousness, but a distributed entity that existed across multiple dimensions. He could perceive the Void Weavers' true nature and fight them on their own terms. The footage of the Battle of Null Space that followed was unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, firing weapons that could reach across folded spacetime to strike enemies that weren't entirely real. The human fleet was outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, but they held the line through sheer determination and their willingness to sacrifice their humanity. "We learned that conventional tactics meant nothing," Ji-hoon said, as the images showed human soldiers emerging from their ships to fight in the vacuum of space itself. Our Marines underwent cybernetic enhancement that replaced their organs with quantum processors, their blood with liquid computation. They became living weapons capable of existing in the void between realities. Lieutenant Commander Kex, aboard Admiral Veltar's flagship, stared at the readings in disbelief. "Sir, these enhancement procedures would kill any organic being. The human nervous system couldn't possibly survive this level of modification." "They didn't survive," Ji-hoon replied, somehow hearing the conversation across the void. "They transcended. Death became meaningless when consciousness could be backed up, transferred, and distributed across quantum networks. We became immortal, by ceasing to be alive in any traditional sense. The Cheonsar demonstrated its capabilities, its hull beginning to phase in and out of normal space-time. Parts of the ship became translucent, then transparent, then completely invisible as it shifted between dimensions. When it reappeared, the very space around it seemed different, more solid, more real, as if the ship's presence was reinforcing the structure of reality itself. "Kim So-young was our greatest hero," Ji-hoon said, his voice carrying infinite sadness. "She commanded the battleship Un-ha and was the first to complete full transformation. Her consciousness merged completely with her vessel, becoming a living ship that could exist in the spaces between dimensions." The display showed a battle that had lasted for 3,000 years, with a single human ship holding a breach in reality closed through pure force of will. The Yunha had become something beyond a mere vessel. It was a fortress of concentrated existence, preventing the Void Weavers from breaking through into normal space. She held the line alone for millennia, Ji-hoon continued. While the rest of us evolved to match her sacrifice, she stood guard at the primary breach point, her consciousness stretched across centuries of constant battle. By the time we could relieve her, she had become something that existed more in the quantum realm than in our reality. Admiral Veltar felt sick as he watched the gradual extinction of humanity as a biological species. Each battle showed them becoming less human and more machine, less individual and more collective, less alive and more eternal. They had won their war against the Void Weavers, but the victory had cost them everything that made them human. Why? Are you telling us this? He asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Because the barriers we built are weakening, Ji-hoon replied, his voice now carrying harmonics of fear that chilled every being who heard it. You're expanding. Civilization creates quantum ripples that propagate through the dimensional barriers. The Void Weavers are following these ripples, probing for weaknesses. The tactical display shifted to show current readings from the edge of known space. Sensors were detecting anomalies that matched the early warning signs of Void Weaver incursions, spots, where reality seemed thinner, where the laws of physics became unreliable. They are coming, Admiral, Ji-hoon said simply, and this time we may not be enough to stop them. The assembled fleet hung in stunned silence as the implications became clear. The galaxy's greatest period of peace and prosperity had been built on humanity's sacrifice, and now that sacrifice might not be enough to save them all. The Cheonsar hung motionless in the void, but something fundamental had changed. The massive warship that had struck terror into the hearts of every species in the galaxy was now becoming something else entirely. Its hull, once solid and imposing, had turned translucent like frosted glass, revealing the incredible complexity within. Admiral Veltar watched through his enhanced sensors as the ship's interior became visible. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about reality. The crew quarters, the weapon systems, the command bridge, all of it was transforming into patterns of pure energy. Quantum matrices pulsed where human beings had once stood, their consciousness now existing as geometric patterns of light that moved through the ship's systems like living thoughts. My God, whispered Dr. Yon from her station. They're not just controlling the ship anymore, they are the ship. Their minds have become part of its quantum structure. Captain Park Ji-hoon's voice emanated from every speaker simultaneously, but now it carried harmonics that made the very air seem to vibrate with otherworldly energy. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. The war is over, he announced, and the weight of 20,000 years of conflict pressed down on every soul who heard him. We won, but victory came at a price that no species should ever have to pay. Humanity as you knew it is extinct. We are the last echoes of what we once were. The holographic displays across the Federation fleet began showing records that had never been seen before, the final battle against the Void Weavers. The images were almost too intense to watch. Human ships, their hulls glowing with quantum energy, formed a massive barrier at the edge of known reality. But these weren't just ships anymore. They were living beings, conscious entities that had once been human. Look at this, Commander Seok called out, his voice filled with awe and horror. The battle lasted for 17 years. 17 years of continuous fighting against entities that existed to destroy everything. The footage showed the incredible sacrifice of humanity's final defenders. Captain Choi Hyejin of the battleship Incheon's Light deliberately overloaded her quantum matrix, using her own consciousness as fuel to forge a seal across a massive breach in space-time. The explosion that followed wasn't just physical, it was existential, creating a barrier made from her very soul. She held nothing. Back, Ji-hoon continued, his voice now seeming to come from the fabric of space itself. When the primary breach threatened to tear reality apart, Captain Choi made the ultimate choice. She became the seal itself, her consciousness spread across light years of dimensional barrier. Admiral Veltar felt tears streaming down his face as he watched Commander Yun Tai-ho make a similar sacrifice. The young officer had been barely 25 when humanity first encountered the Void Weavers. In the final battle, now ancient beyond measure, he transformed himself into a quantum anchor, a living foundation that would maintain the barriers for eternity. One by one, we transcended physical existence, Ji-hoon explained as the footage showed ship after ship undergoing the same transformation. We became living patches in the fabric of reality itself, conscious guardians standing eternal watch against the darkness. But even as they watched these incredible sacrifices, new alarms began sounding across the Federation fleet. Long-range sensors were detecting anomalies at the galaxy's edge, the same quantum disturbances that had announced the Void Weaver's original arrival. "The seals are weakening," Ji-hoon said simply, and his words sent chills through every being who heard them. "The quantum signatures your sensors detected were not from our approach. They were from new breaches forming as your civilization expands into unexplored space. The implications hit the assembled fleet like a physical blow. Every new colony, every exploration mission, every expansion of galactic civilization was creating ripples that the Void Weavers could follow back to inhabited space. You're telling us that our own progress is endangering the galaxy?" "Admiral," Veltar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Growth is not evil," Ji-hoon replied, his consciousness now beginning to spread beyond the confines of his ship. "But growth without wisdom, expansion without understanding, these things can tear holes in the fabric of existence itself." The Cheongsar began to pulse with incredible energy as data streams flowed from its quantum core into the Federation's networks. The information transfer was overwhelming. 20,000 years of tactical knowledge, weapons technology that could manipulate reality itself, and most importantly, the hard-won understanding of how to fight an enemy that existed to unmake existence. Captain Lisa Park watched her station's displays overflow with data as the ship's computers struggled to process the incoming information. Weapon designs that used compressed space-time as ammunition, shield generators that created pockets of reinforced reality. Most incredibly, instructions for the consciousness transfer process that could allow organic beings to exist as pure thought. "This is incredible," she breathed. "They're giving us everything, every secret, every advancement, every technique they developed during 20 millennia of war." But the cost of that knowledge became clear as the Cheongsar began to fade. The ship's hull became increasingly transparent as Captain Ji-hoon's consciousness prepared for its final transformation. "We return not to reclaim our place among you." His voice was growing distant, as if speaking from across vast dimensions. "We come to pass the torch to those who still remember what it means to be alive." The assembled fleet watched in stunned silence as the greatest warship in galactic history began to dissolve into quantum energy. But this wasn't destruction, it was transformation. The Cheongsar was becoming something that existed between dimensions, joining the eternal vigil that humanity had maintained for 20,000 years. "Remember this," Ji-hoon's voice was now barely a whisper, carried on quantum frequencies that touched every conscious mind in the system. "We were not the strongest species in the galaxy. We were not the most intelligent or the most technologically advanced. We were simply the most stubborn, the ones willing to pay any price to protect what we loved." The ship faded to complete transparency, then vanished entirely. But somehow everyone knew it was still there, still watching, still standing guard against the darkness that lurked beyond the edges of reality. A final transmission echoed across all frequencies, carrying the voice of every human who had ever lived. "We kept our promise. We held the line. The barriers will hold for now, but prepare yourselves. The day will come when you must choose between remaining who you are and becoming what the galaxy needs. Choose wisely." Admiral Veltar looked around at his bridge crew, seeing his own mixture of grief and determination reflected in their faces. Humanity had given them the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge and tools needed to defend their galaxy. But they had also inherited the greatest responsibility any species had ever borne. In the depths of space, quantum sensors detected the first signs of new breaches forming at the galaxy's edge. The Void Weavers were still out there, still probing for weaknesses, still seeking to unmake everything that existed. The war was over, but the vigil had just begun. The Federation fleet turned toward home, carrying with them the knowledge that would either save the galaxy or damn it. Behind them, invisible guardians maintained their eternal watch, the transformed remnants of humanity standing sentinel against the endless dark. The end.